Okay, well, welcome to today's distance class. I'm very excited to have all of you here. How are you doing today, Mr. Anderson?
I'm doing very well.
Good. Do you know the status of Mrs. Godlewski?
I know she's trying to call in. She's going to not use her microphone and speakers, but instead call in on the phone line. So she should be with us momentarily.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, then let's get started with the prayer. Would you offer it for us, please?
I'd be happy to.
Great, thank you.
Dear Father in heaven, we're thankful to come before Thee as a class today and to study history, the story that Thou hast built and laid out for us to learn from. We're grateful for Mr. Gentile for his preparations and pray for a blessing upon each of us today that in our own preparations we may be blessed, and as we discuss and work together that we may glean insights that we did not previously have. We pray for the Spirit to dwell with us and to be our teacher and to impress things on our hearts that we need and that as Thou seest fit. We ask these blessings humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much for that prayer, Mr. Anderson. Well, you know, I feel so excited about today's class. I really think that it's going to be fantastic. What I'd like to do is I'd like to first start by going into the home page, and we can see the view in our Brain Honey. And what I would like to do is I would just like to go to the class announcements. Excuse me, those are back at the home. Excuse me. And we'll see what we have in store for us this class. We'll be following this schedule so that we'll always know what we have in store. Hello, Mrs. Godlewski? Hello?
Hi, this is Wendy Godlewski.
Hi, very nice to meet you over the phone. This is Nick Gentile, Mr. Gentile.
Hi.
And we're grateful to have you with us. So are you able to see my screen?
I am. I just can't get any audio off the headset I bought. I couldn't hear you, so I called in.
Right. Well, I'm sorry about those technical troubles, but I'm glad that you can at least be with us via the phone for this class, and hopefully we can get those taken care of for you.
Okay.
Okay, well, great. Well, so as you can see our class schedule, today is September the 14th, and I appreciate you being so prompt about coming to class at our newly scheduled times. As we can see today, we'll discuss, and I will highlight an overview of England during the 17th century, which is that timeline that you were able to read. And then also we have the Pepys and Evelyn Diaries, or the Pepys and Evelyn Diaries, whichever one you'd prefer to use. Hello, is that someone else joining us as well?
You might just be hearing my answer machine that came on.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. Well, as you can see, we'll have a couple things to do at your tutorial next week. So not the one for this week, but the one next week will be a 5-paragraph essay that compares and contrasts Pepys and Evelyn. And then also the homework that will be due on Wednesday will be to view the PowerPoint presentation, The Glorious Revolution, Music and Art from the Era, and then to study the timeline of 17th century England that hopefully you're able to view for class today. And then there'll be a short quiz on Brain Honey entitled 17th Century England Music, Art, and History that you can take. And I'll post that as well after the class. That's just a little overview of what we have in store today. And so what I'd like to do then is if we go over to our timeline. Let's see. So, and would you please give me the pronunciation of your name, Mrs. Godlewski?
Just ignore the W, or you can ignore it or make it a V sound. It's Godlewski or Godlewski.
Okay, great. Well, I will do my very best. Godlewski. Does that sound all right to you?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. I'll do my very best. As one who has a last name that's often mispronounced, that's how that is. It's not Gentile, but Gentile, or actually Gentile. It's Italian. And then we know Mr. Anderson, who's here as well. Okay, well, so my first question to you, I think, is an exciting one. What are some of the themes that you were able to reason from the timeline of England during the 17th century? What are some of the themes that were going on during this century in England?
The back and forth between the idea that there was a divine right of kings and tyranny, and and the people protesting against that idea because it had a taste of something better and wanted to reestablish it.
Great, thank you so much for that insight. You know, it's such a fascinating history to study because we see this great eternal principle of agency. I mean, there was a war in heaven over it. We have an atonement that allows us to become agents, to act and not to be acted upon. And now, here we are looking at this history where we see the divine hand inspiring people who were fighting for agency, for freedom, for consent. And then on the other hand, right, we have, if you will, sort of Satan's plan, which is sort of this divine right of kings, just, it's my will, and I really don't care what you think. And so we have this government of the one, or government by will, or force, by government by consent. And you know what? You pointed out. Hello, do we have someone joining the class? Okay. I heard a ringing. Well, as you can see, this is such a neat theme because as we look at these Stuart kings who proved to be so troublesome for England, we can see people were constantly fighting for this freedom. So what were some events that you saw, either Mr. Anderson or Mrs. Godlewski, that demonstrate this theme specifically?
First, a question. Was Elizabeth a part of the Stuarts?
No, Elizabeth was actually before this time, and James I was the first Stuart king.
So she was a Tudor?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
In answer to your question, I think it's really interesting, that Oliver Cromwell came in and tried, and thought that he was going to give the people some liberty, but he apparently hadn't controlled the evil within himself, I guess. Which is often the case. People think that they're going to replace something bad with something better, and you often end up with something just as bad, if not worse.
Definitely. That is such an astute observation. I really appreciate it because, it was interesting. As I was talking about this subject with my scholars in my daytime section of this class, they were so fascinated to see the trends because we have James I, right, and then we have Charles I, both of them who are so troublesome for rights. And what does Charles I do in 1629? What does he do that made people so angry and that ushered in 11 years of tyranny? What was that event?
Dissolving Parliament? Is that what you're talking about?
Right, exactly. He dissolved Parliament. Now, why would dissolving Parliament be such a big deal to these people in England?
Well, that was their only vestige of representative government that they had.
Definitely. That's a great answer. It's interesting because, like you were pointing out with Cromwell, here we have Charles I dissolving Parliament, and what did they do to Charles I? They beheaded him in 1649, right? Eventually, after the English Civil War, at the very conclusion of it. And then if we look here, right, what does Cromwell do? Well, 10 years later, okay, or just a little over 10 years later, right? The
Dissolve
same
Parliament, right?
Exactly the same thing, And I think that it is so interesting because Cromwell is saying, hey, I have a Puritan alternative, I have a Commonwealth alternative, and Commonwealth was a term that was laden with virtuous meaning to these 17th century intellectuals. For them, a commonwealth was the very highest and noblest form of government. It was a government in which there was the freedom of representation, in which the people were sovereign, in which there was voting for representatives. And so here Cromwell calls his government initially a commonwealth, right? And then when he realizes that he can't do what he wants under the parameters of the commonwealth, he starts a protectorate, which was so interesting. I had one of my students in my other class say, doesn't that sound like a sort of like a communist term, a protectorate? And it's very interesting because what Cromwell set out to do quickly morphed into something that was so much different. And I like what you said, Mrs. Godlewski, that it really did sort of morph into that evil within where, that pride, that lust for power, it did corrupt. And so here he does dissolve Parliament the same way. Well, I think that it's quite telling here. Okay, after he dissolves Parliament, then what do the people do?
Wasn't Charles II living in France or something, and they brought him back?
Right. That's right. So they had hated...
Because he was, and was it more of a religious thing? They were looking for someone who wasn't Catholic, or... I'm not sure.
Right. Oh, that's a great point. In fact, the religion of Charles II will be called into question very shortly after he returns, or after he comes to power, returning the Stuart house to power. It's really fascinating because he was brought back because after a while people said, boy, I guess things just aren't as bad as under Cromwell. We thought they'd be better, but, well, let's try the Stuart again, even though we just beheaded your father. Come out of exile in France and come back to us. And then we'll see religion playing a part. And so, first of all, Cromwell, do we know what religion he espoused?
Wasn't it Puritan?
That's right. He was a Puritan. And, Cromwell, just to be fair to him, while he did a lot of things as a ruler that were arbitrary and that sort of smacked of the absolute rule that was going on in places like France at the same time, he also made life better for Puritans because under Charles I, as you saw, that he made life very difficult for the Puritans and the Pilgrims or the separatist groups that were around there. And so, Cromwell did give some more religious Puritans, and so we have people like John Milton, who was able to write about how wonderful it is to behead Charles I. And we'll actually, in our class, we'll read something that John Milton wrote. And Milton is the author of Paradise Lost. He is also the author of many famous political tracts, including The Tenure of Kings.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, most of the time, but every now and then, just like now, you went out for like 10 seconds.
Oh, no. Oh. I am very sorry. I'm not sure why that would be the case.
I'm taking Nick's online class.
Oh. Has he started it?
Yeah, it was like Thursday.
How many students
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
are...
and most of the time, 99% of the time I can. It's just
Okay.
twice you've dropped out for a few seconds.
Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so Mr. Anderson, are you still with us? Mr. Anderson?
Yes, this is Mr. Anderson.
So from your reading of the timeline, what can you tell us about the rule of Charles II and then James II?
That's a great question. Can I just ask first for Mrs. Johnson to mute her microphone? Mrs. Johnson, can you hear me?
Yeah, how do I do that?
Up on the right corner, you can see that there are speakers. When you bring out that yellow field, and there's a speaker that you can just click on that will mute you.
You'll have to say that again. There's a speaker where?
I'm sorry. Heidi Johnson, your microphone up at the very top. Go ahead and click on the green microphone left of your name.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. But if you
I
click
can
on
hear you as well.
Okay, I'm clicking on it, and it highlights it, and it makes it blue.
Okay. I just wanted you to be aware that we could hear Mr. Heyman there for a minute.
Sorry.
And that's fine.
I'm still not clear. I don't know how to mute that. Sorry.
Do we all need to mute as well?
No, I think that if the sound ever gets too staticky, then yes, you would mute and unmute, and that sometimes clears the static. But for each of us, we should have a little control bar up in the top if it's green microphone.
Now. Okay, I see it now. It says click to mute. Got it. Do it.
So if anyone walks into your room, you can just click on that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was trying to cover the mic and mouth the words to them, but okay.
That's
sorry.
okay. This is the first couple classes. We'll just take.
Yes. Okay. I am now muting. Off I go.
No problem.
Great. Well, and Walter, are you with us as well? Hello, Walter.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome, Walter. So right now we have Mrs. Johnson, we have Walter Pierre, St. Pierre, and then we have Wendy Godlewski and then Mr. Anderson in the class. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay,
Good.
excellent. Well, then let's continue on. So Mr. Anderson, then before we move to the primary sources, just tell us a little bit about how you would characterize the reigns of Charles II and James II, and this is from your reading of the timeline.
Right. Well, it appears that they also had a desire for power and were willing to force even the the Catholic religion upon England, and that, of course, takes a little bit of a divine sense of entitlement to power. I believe more than of course they had experienced under Cromwell, and so it was that back and forth that Mrs. Godlewski mentioned.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. Okay. Well, what I want to do then is I want to try to walk us through actually some of the sources that would help a historian to construct a timeline like this one. This is one that I picked. I tried to pick important events. But different historians might have picked other events. I think that part of this class will be that I would like you to try to become historians as well as just students of the past. And so what I want to do then is I want to click over to our primary sources because this is where textbooks come from. And so hopefully all of you were able to read Samuel Pepys as well as John Evelyn and on pages. And now I know that, Mrs. Godlewski, you said that you had some trouble with the page numbers. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't find the Pepys or Pepys diary until page 67.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I know that here on the online version as well as in the version of my documents, which I created, it's page 57. Did anyone else find that it was not page 57?
And where do you show the Evelyn excerpt ending? What page do you show that ending?
Well, so if we just scroll down here, Evelyn starts bottom of page 58, and then Evelyn ends after page 62, with the English Bill of Rights starting on 63.
Okay, and mine ends on 76. Am I the only one who had that problem?
I think so.
Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not sure why that would be the case.
All right. Well, I'll just be more careful now. I know what.
No, that's fine. I don't know if maybe somehow the font size was changed, or so it changed things, or some formatting.
And we could create a PDF version to send to you so that all of the page numbers are consistent across the homework assignments.
Okay.
Well, I'm looking here. I pulled up mine, and my Samuel Pepys excerpts from his diary is page 57. So I guess something was wrong with Wendy's.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can remedy that for you. I'm really sorry about that.
That's right.
Okay. Well, then what I want to do is I would like to ask ourselves some questions about these documents that you've read. And as we go here, I have a PowerPoint that will sort of help us and introduce us to Pepys or Pepys. We could really say them either way. Either one is fine. I think the old English pronunciation or the English pronunciation would be Pepys, but Pepys I think is a lot more familiar to us. So here we go. These diaries are eyewitness accounts of life in 17th century England. Let's see. And here's a picture of Mr. Pepys or Pepys, and I think it's very interesting to note that both Pepys and Evelyn, and if we go over here to Evelyn for a second, we can see that, well, here he is, but both of them worked for the king in some capacity. Now, and a question that I'll have a little bit later will be, what do you think they did? But as we read their diaries, we get some slightly different accounts of events with some slightly different feelings about them, even though they both worked in very similar jobs. And so what I want to do then is I'd like to go back, and if we look at the the Pepys diary. I think you can all see those questions. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what event does Pepys provide a window into in the first paragraph of his diary under May 1660 on the 28th? What event do you think he talks about there?
The burning of the old acts.
Okay, the burning of the old
The Commonwealth.
Acts.
Uh-huh.
That's right. And so here we are talking about the Commonwealth. And whose Commonwealth was it?
Cromwell's?
Excellent, right? So it was Cromwell's Commonwealth. And it's May of 1660. And here they just burn these acts, right? Sort of having a hangman, okay, an executioner come, and by vote of Parliament burn these acts. And so obviously, what does that show us? Walter, what do you think the burning of those acts shows us about how Parliament felt about the Commonwealth by May of 1660?
I don't think so. So you're asking how the Parliament thought about the Commonwealth?
That question would also work. Yeah. How do they feel about Cromwell's Commonwealth, and then also you could infer his protectorate?
I don't think they would have liked it.
Yeah, they didn't like it very much. Okay. Yeah, you know what? You're exactly right. In fact, they didn't like it. They didn't like it so much that they would even go back and do what that we learn about in the second paragraph. What did Parliament do? There is a reference in the second paragraph for the 29th of May. And let's see. Do you all have that in front of you? You do?
Yes.
Yeah, I do, but I
Okay.
haven't read this yet, so I'm skimming.
Oh, you haven't
quickly.
read it? Okay, that's all right. That's all right. Well, he speaks to a friend, Mr. Radcliffe, and there's some preaching, quote unquote, going on. And what is mentioned? What is mentioned in that sermon?
I assume he's referring to the Lord King that's returned is the king that's
right,
replacing
okay.
Cromwell. I'm not sure what he means by "nay, let him take all." Does he just mean we'll let him handle all the laws from now on?
Okay, that is a very good question. What I want to do is I want to bounce it back, and before I answer it, what does everybody think about that? Why would they say, "Let him take all, since my Lord and King is returned"? Keep in mind what we just read about in the first paragraph, that Cromwell was so unpopular. So what are they saying here as they hand over the country back to Charles II, back to the Stuarts?
We don't trust ourselves to create anything better, so here, we'll give you the reins.
Yeah. I think that's a great explanation. I think it's so interesting because from 1642 on, they tried. I mean, with this Civil War. I mean, this English Civil War that you read about in the timeline. I mean, it was really a war. It wasn't just a war of words. I mean, this was bloodshed. This was Cromwell leading the new model army, and there were battles, and people died, over this, and they were really trying to make something better. Cromwell came in with, I mean, as we can assume, the best of intentions, and, well, things turned for the worse, and now the people, so fed up with this experiment in greater freedom and greater self-governance, right, as we could use the term in American heritage, that they resort back to the same family, right, that they just beheaded, right, or just kicked out of power in 1649. And so, yeah, it's one of those times when a historian would read this source and say, wow, I guess they really were fed up with Cromwell, and they were ready for anything. They were so desperate. It's neat because as we look at this event, and this event you will hear about it referenced throughout history as the Restoration. And so don't be confused as a Latter-day Saint with the restoration of the gospel. This is a very different restoration. But nonetheless, this is called the Restoration, and it's the restoration of the Stuart monarchy. Now, as we think about why Pepys would have a friend who would go as far as saying, "Oh, my Lord, the King is returned," what do you think he did? Or if you were able to read on what I have is page 58, basically the last 3 paragraphs we have from Pepys, what do you think he did? What was his work? I told you he worked for the king, but what did he do? Any ideas? Any guesses?
No idea.
No idea. I appreciate your honesty. There is a certain trade that keeps coming up again and again in those paragraphs, and it has to do with water. Not sure if any of you were able to.
The christening? Are you talking about the christening?
Not the christening. No, but that is a good point. But the last three paragraphs we have June 4th, 9th, and 10th. He talks about having these meetings with people. And Mr. Anderson, do you have a guess?
I might have a guess.
Is that Heidi or is that Wendy? I can't tell.
Wendy.
Okay.
Something in the Navy, maybe?
Yeah. You know what? It was something in the Navy, because under both Charles II and James II, Pepys would become the secretary to the Admiralty, which controlled all naval affairs for Britain. And it's very interesting because prior to Charles II coming to power, Pepys had been working his way up the ladder, so to speak. And he never had any experience in the Navy himself, but sort of through hard work and patronage and doing a good job at what he did, he put himself in a position with the king, so that this would be actually a good thing for him. And so even though Charles II and James II tried this forced Catholicization on England, he made out really well. It worked for him because of his political leanings. Now, it's very interesting as we compare Evelyn, and unfortunately, just for the sake of time, we're going a little quicker than I had planned, but we've had some technical difficulties in getting started and all of that. But what I wanted to do is, if we look at Evelyn, and we look at the restoration of the Stuarts, and we look at the very first paragraph of Evelyn, and let me switch over here. So let's see. There we go. There's Evelyn again. And Evelyn, so we just heard that Pepys was secretary for the Admiralty, and Evelyn had a really interesting career. He was one of those people who was so rich that he didn't really have to do much, but he did a ton. He was a bibliophile of the very first order. He liked to create gardens. He wrote books about herbs and trees. He helped found the Royal Society, which is perhaps the oldest scientific society that's still in existence in London. And he wrote books on just numerous subjects as well. Anyway, so here he is with a skull showing his love for nature and anatomy, and really he just read and read and read. Well, he also was a diarist like Pepys. And this is a great I think lesson for us as Latter-day Saints about diary writing.
He also
keeping
was
a journal.
a what? Did you say? Oh, a diarist.
A diarist.
Did you say a diarist? Okay.
Yeah, a diarist. Because people, President Kimball said that the angels may quote from it. Well, here we are in this class quoting from their diaries. And certainly we're less than angels, but yet just keeping a record for them was so important to us. And that's why we're able to know about these events in part. And so, okay, if we look at, I think this is very interesting because Evelyn says some really neat things. Do you remember what he said on May 29th, 1660, that entry for the restoration of the Stuarts? How does he characterize the reception that Charles II received from the English people? Anybody remember?
I do. It sounds like it was pretty fabulous.
Yeah.
A big party.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge party, right?
Inexpressible joy.
7 hours.
Yeah. Thank you so much, right? I mean, here we are reading, streets hung with tapestry, fountains running with wine, right? We have, cloth, silver, gold, velvet, people just strewn about the windows and the balconies, coming out to gawk at the king and parade around. And yeah, this is really quite interesting. And so here's the reception of a lot of the people, right? But what does Evelyn feel? How does he feel about this? What does he go on to say? How do you think he felt about Charles II? And this is an inference, so there's no wrong answer.
Well, he felt that his exile was sad and long, so he obviously welcomed his return.
Mm-hmm. Welcomed his return, and perhaps for reasons of, well, looking at sort of the disorder and the tyranny under Cromwell, was hoping maybe for some better luck this time. It's interesting, though, if we look at the next page, what I have is the entries from June 25th, 1686, all the way down through, November 5th, 1688. What does Evelyn continue to talk about? He talks about a king, and it's not Charles II. It's actually, who would you say, if you put the timeline together with this primary source, who is the king? He keeps calling now His Majesty, etc. Who's the Majesty?
The Orange King, the Prince?
Not William
that
of
he keeps
Orange.
talking about?
That's a great guess.
Oh.
William of Orange will be in 1688. But
Okay.
from 1686, or actually 85, all the way through 88, who is the king in England? Walter, do you remember the king from between those dates?
Is it James II?
It is the James II. Yes, excellent. Right, James II. Okay, and James II. If going back to our timeline, if Charles II started making Catholicism more popular and more tolerable in a heavily Protestant country, well, James II just took that ball and ran with it so far that the people were really upset. Now, if we look here, why was James II so unpopular? If this question in the middle, right? What specifically did he do? Do you remember some of the things that he did? And see if you can look for them if you don't remember them.
He removed Protestants out of their office.
Mm-hmm. That's right. He took Protestants out and he put in Catholics.
Right.
Okay, excellent. What else did he do? What about if we look in the first paragraph, June 25th, 1686? This, if you think about it, is really very interesting.
Oh, they weren't allowed to preach against the Pope?
That's right. So can you imagine going into sacrament meeting and your bishop gets up and says, I know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only church on the face of the earth, right? That is true. That has all of the fullness, with which the Lord himself is well pleased. He starts sort of bearing a testimony, and then in come the guards, out goes the bishop, and he's thrown in jail. Right, because he professed the feelings of his heart about religion. I think it's very interesting to think about that kind of a climate and relate it to ourselves. What kind of a principle do you think James II is violating there? What sort of rights? How would you describe the rights he's violating?
Freedom of speech and conscience, I would say.
Yeah, speech and conscience. Was that Heidi?
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much. I'll get to know your voices, I'm sure, over the course of this. Right now I'm just sort of staring at my screen and imagining you there. But, I think it's so interesting, as we talked about in my class, the non-distance section, when we talked about this, there is a principle that the American Heritage School studies, that's one of the 7 principles of America's Christian education and history and government, and it's the 4th principle, and it's that conscience is the most sacred of all property. And that's a quote from James Madison. And what is more close to our conscience, right, than our religion, than our personal beliefs about God? And here he is, right, throwing people in jail, suspending these excellent divines, or these preachers, right, for preaching against the Pope. Okay. Well, what else is going on in this second paragraph? Mr. Anderson, did you pick up on what kind of ceremonies are now going on in the king's court?
Well, you mean on the November 29th, 1686?
That's correct, yes.
It looks like there are ceremonies having to do with mitres and the divine right of kings again. This idea that it pleased God to enlighten this nation by by putting these Jesuits, the 3 Jesuits, in their copes, and I don't know what copes are. I'm assuming that's clothing.
Yeah, yes, type of ceremonial religious clothing, right? Especially used in the Catholic Church,
Right.
right? And so so basically, if you were to just sum it up, what's going on in the state now? What's becoming official as a state religion?
Well, they're implementing, again, Catholicism throughout all of England.
That's right. It's very important to note that to have people attend a meeting with the king and to have the king force them to sit through a mass, a Catholic mass, or this sort of ceremony of sorts, right, is in direct violation of everything that the people of England had wanted. In fact, here's Evelyn, who, remember, he worked for the king, right, doing some sort of, you could say, consulting and that sort of thing here and there. He didn't have to, okay, but yet he supported the king in some ways, worked for him, but yet, okay, what do you think his religion was? And you don't have to get the specific religion, but what type of religion would it be?
I could not have believed I should ever have seen such a thing. Of course, that means that he was appalled by this hurling of the Catholic religion back onto the people. He was not in favor of what was going on.
Yeah, that's right. Evelyn was a very strong and deeply committed Protestant. And in fact, it's interesting to note, he, just after that line that you read, I could not have believed that I should, and then if we go down, after it had pleased God to enlighten this nation, he's talking about the Reformation. He's saying, we went through the Reformation, okay, it was, little over 100 years ago, and now, right, we have Protestantism, we have this freedom, we have all these different religions in England, right, that are able to freely worship as they please. And now after all of that, we're going back to a state religion. We're people, and I talk about us here in the 21st century in America, who believe in the separation of church and state. And so why is it a bad thing if there's a state religion, like James II was trying to make Catholicism?
Well, because you're forced to believe the main religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I mean, that's it. You're forced. So yeah, I mean, if
there's no diversity.
No diversity, right? If President Obama, if he were to say, okay, not like, I don't think he would do this, but I'm just saying for an example, if he were to say, okay, everybody, tomorrow we're all going to follow, Islam, and anybody else who has any sort of other religion, whether it's Buddhist, Christian, or anything else, well, that's it. You're in jail. You can't have your holy relics or your holy books, your sacred ceremonies anymore. You can't have your temples. And there we go, right? So that's what sort of state religion looks like, and we obviously have been very concerned about that sort of thing in the history of the Mormon Church, trying to find that freedom to worship. In fact, we've moved across the country to try to find a place, a refuge, right? We'll find the place which God for us prepared far away in the West, right? We had to go a little ways before we could have our freedom of religion in that sense. But if we go back now, because we have about 10 minutes left, what I want to do is, if we look at the last page that I wanted you to read from Evelyn. Okay, this talks about the events in November and December of 1688. Now, this may seem very, very subtle, but why do you think, okay, these events, which describe the glorious revolution, why do you think they were glorious to the people? You could quote from the timeline. You could just think, really, what happened that was so special?
What page are we on again? I'm sorry, I kind of messed up my computer. Could somebody just tell me what page we're on?
Well, 59 is the one that I'm looking at,
Okay.
which would be, and in fact, now that we are done with the slideshow, I can actually shut it off, and then I can show you here. So if we go to 60. Okay. So do you see this here? So, okay. So who leaves and who comes? We look at this paragraph that I've circled.
The prince comes.
Okay. Prince comes. And who is the prince? You can go back to your timeline to find this answer.
And where is that located?
The timeline is also on Brain Honey. If you go to the View section, and then you go over all to the folders, and then you go to Glorious Revolution, and then it says England during the 17th century. That's the timeline.
Okay.
So the prince is William. Prince William.
That's right. William of Orange, right? And he came with his wife Mary. Okay. And who's the king? Who will leave?
James the Second.
There we go. James the Second, right? Now, I mean, maybe it doesn't seem like a big thing for one king to leave and another king to come on in from the Netherlands. But why do you think this was so glorious? It talks about the coronation and so what was so great about it? I mean, why would we study this event versus, I don't know, a lot of others in history?
Well, this restores some form of representative government and freedom of religion.
Okay, excellent. So restoring representative government. Okay, remember, when we started the class talking about the themes, right, of 17th century England, one of the great observations that Mrs. Godlewski made was that it was a struggle, okay, between the divine right of kings, okay, and then consent of the governed. And here, finally, by the end of the century, okay, just almost 10 years before it ended, okay, we have a resolution. And in fact, one of the reasons why this resolution is so important is because it remained England's form of government until today. It's still true. I mean, they still have a king or queen, I should say, in this case, right? And then at this point, sort of the monarch is nothing but really a figurehead. But okay, from this point on, from the Glorious Revolution on, you had what was referred to as a king in Parliament, meaning that Parliament was supreme or sovereign. And therefore, if Parliament is sovereign, then the people are sovereign compared to the king. And so, yeah, the king is still there, and they have a mixed monarchy, okay, but it becomes this constitutional monarchy where even though England has never had a document like ours, sort of a one-time constitution where everything's written down together. They go by precedents and common law, and it's all sort of a constitution, quote unquote. But from this time on, the people are sovereign. And this will be the first in 3 great revolutions during the next 100-year period. The Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution, in which the people gained sovereignty, in which representation won out over will and absolutism, or an absolute monarchy. And so, yeah, the Glorious Revolution is incredibly important. And so if we were to just go back here, right, and look at this timeline, and so we have this parliamentary democracy. The king never again in England's history had absolute power. And then the Bill of Rights would later be written basically codifying, okay, all of these changes in making Parliament and the people supreme. And then the interesting thing is, while religious toleration, as Mrs. Godlewski rightly said, did increase, right, of course, for Protestants, as well as Protestant nonconformists, as you can see from the timeline, right, though we had a pendulum swing, and Catholics started to be persecuted, which is too bad, right, because here they are crying for freedom of religion, and then they turn around and start persecuting somebody else. Okay, well, what I want to do then is I want to, before we close, I'd like to, if we just go back here to Brain Honey, I wanted to just look at what we have in store for us. So September 16th, who can tell us what we will look at for the next class? Is there, and I think you can see the screen.
What is it?
What is the topic for September 16th?
Glorious, the music and art.
That's right. Yeah. So there, we'll be discussing a PowerPoint presentation that I have about the music and art of the era of the Glorious Revolution. Or really, if we look, we're going to look at 17th century England and the music and art of that era. You know, I just want to make sure that you all know how to access your homework. And so, for example, here, if we go back to the home, after you log into Brain Honey, you'll know that here we have the syllabus, the gradebook, objectives. If you want to go to the view, well, first of all, I guess I should say, if you want to know what your homework will be, you can click on the class schedule, and then you'll see what's due and when. Okay, and here we're September 14th, and here are the two pieces of homework, one that will be due next week, and then the one that will be due for next class. And so I just want to remind you to view the PowerPoint presentation, and then just if you want to review the timeline, and then there'll be a quiz on Brain Honey that you can take from this afternoon on. And then after that, we will meet on Wednesday. Any questions about that?
We take the quiz before our next meeting, and we need to watch the PowerPoint presentation before we take the quiz. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So basically, view the PowerPoint presentation and restudy the timeline before you take the quiz.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you'll come to class, and then we'll really go in depth about the music and art.
Now, can you show me how to watch the PowerPoint presentations? Where do we get to those?
That's a great question. So if you go to view, you see up here, I'm pointing at the view,
Yeah.
and yours will just say World History from 1600 distance. You'll notice a bunch of folders here on the left. There's recorded classes. I'll put all of our classes up here. So, for example, you can see the one, if you missed it from the first time, here it is. And then also the Glorious Revolution, you just click on that, and the timeline is right here, England during the 17th century. And then there's the diaries. This was the PowerPoint that we viewed today, if you want to go back and look at those questions. The Glorious Revolution Music and Art PowerPoint is right here. The primary source readings, which will be all of the readings for the Glorious Revolution, are here. Anyway, and there are a couple other things there as well. And so you just click on here, and then you can click on those, and everything opens up in your Brain Honey window.
But is the PowerPoint in there also?
Yep. Yeah, it's this one right here, the Glorious Revolution Music and Art.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, for example, if you click on this one, see
Okay.
it's a PPT. So
Yes.
PPTX is PowerPoint. So you just click on that one, and then it'll come right up for you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, great. Walter, do you have any questions? No? Okay. Well, then I just want to remind you that we now have everybody signed up for a tutorial. Walter, your tutorial will be Wednesday at 11. Mrs. Godlewski, your tutorial will be Thursday at 11. Mr. Anderson, your tutorial will be Friday at 11. And then Mrs. Johnson, your tutorial will be Thursday at 3:30. Okay. Any questions about those?
No questions.
Okay,
Thanks.
well, great. Well, I'm excited for our next class. We'll be getting into the music and art of the era. As I said, it should prove to be lots of fun. We'll be seeing visual pictures as well as I have music embedded in the PowerPoint presentation that we'll all be able to listen to and analyze together. So.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Well,
Do you
thank
have
so
time
much.
for a
Any
quick
other
question?
questions? Sure, please.
Back on the primary source reading, June 25th, 1686, the Evelyn diary, or actually November 29th.
Oh, okay. Yeah, November 29th. Yep.
How would I have known, reading this paragraph, how would I have known that this was a government function that he was attending, I mean, I can see the Catholic overtones, but how would I know that it's a government function that he's attending?
Okay. Excellent. So Whitehall is the seat of English government, and it's actually still the seat of the Parliament today.
But it sounds like he's there for a music performance.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So there's music, right? And then also there's this service. So it's sort of all happening at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, when you talked about this is an example of the Catholic becoming the state religion, I don't know how I would have discovered that on my own. Because it kind of just sounds like he's there for a musical performance, and they do a little bit of religion at the beginning.
Yeah, I think the key is where it is, and that would just be that word there at the end of the first line, Whitehall. And so that would be something where if and that is an excellent question. In fact, I mean that's one of the reasons why when you're reading primary sources, you know, it is good to have somebody with a little more of a background to help.
It's very difficult. Yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah. But yeah, Whitehall, you could look it up, and you know that would be something that you'd be like, oh, Whitehall, oh, they went there, you know, and then it would sort of give you a little bit of a clue. But you know, really, I think it's a great question because you know, with all of these sources, you know, we're doing what historians do, which is basically making their best guess, you know, because I mean, there's so many pieces to the puzzle of the past, and you know, you turn up one and you think, oh, I think I got it, and then you turn up another and you're like, oh, that's a little different. And then basically the more pieces you get, the fuller the picture becomes, and the fuller the picture becomes, the more you can say, oh, okay, I really start understanding the nuances of this topic. But you know, that was a tremendous question, so thank you for asking.
Okay, just something I'm going to need to get used to.
Yeah.
I'm used to having information be more direct.
Yeah. Well,
all right. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. Well, I hope everybody has a great day then, and I'll see you again on Wednesday.
Okay. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Take care. Bye.